we supposed to call you?
Okay, for now, temporarily, you can call me Clint.
No way are you cool enough to pull off Clint.
Okay, so what name am I cool enough to pull off?
Jean.
It's Clint. It's Clint.
See you later, Gene.
Bye, Jean.
It's Clint. Clint.
What's up with Gene?
Woo! Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Die Hard MMA podcast. I'm your host, as always, Clint McLean. What is up, Die Hards? Welcome back to another episode of the Die Hard MMA podcast. We are coming off of a fun night of fights in UFC Moscow, and we are gearing up for yet another good solid night of fights. This time we are headed all the way around the world to Brazil, the birthplace of jiu-jitsu and arguably MMA in general. It's another solid fight night, not a ton of giant name value, but there are going to be some battles on this fight card, very much worth watching. Maybe not as many spots as I would like to for betting, but don't you worry. I found a few. Now, first things first, we gotta talk, diehards. All right, come sit down, have a talk with Papa Clint. Now, first thing I need you to understand is, I'm not mad. I'm just disappointed. We have been getting upwards of 500 views on all the YouTube videos lately. We are trending in the right direction. In fact, Russia, the UFC Russia episode, got over 600 views. And while that's great, we're headed the right direction. I love it. We only got 31 likes on that episode. We're averaging about 25 to 30 likes per episode, and we have got 500 to 600 people listening to this episode right now. Help a brother out. Come on, hit the like button. Hit the subscribe button. Let me know you enjoy the content that I'm bringing to you. And I know every single YouTuber out there always gives their pitch about like, share, subscribe. Well, it's true. We got to get out there, and we can't get out there without your help. If you appreciate the content I'm bringing to you, please hit the thumbs up. Hit the subscribe button. If you're following me on a audio only platform, leave me a review. Jump in the comments section. If you're on Twitter, retweet this bad boy. Help me out. It would go a million miles for me, and I would greatly appreciate it. The other way that you can show support for the podcast are tips and donations. Those always go a long way to helping me out as well. Those of you who are new to the Die Hard MMA podcast, I am a one-man show. I research my ass off to bring you a fun, entertaining show and all the information I can. We want to turn casual MMA fans into Die Hard MMA fans, and we want to turn sports bettors into MMA bettors. And if we can take you all the way from someone just tipping their toe into MMA to degenerate betting on it every single weekend, well, I'm okay with that. In fact, I'd be pretty proud of that. So tips and donations can be sent to me. My PayPal address is maximusin3d@gmail.com, and on Venmo, I am at DieHardMMAPod. I will put those below the show. And again, like I said, I'm not a professional bettor. I am just some dude who is a giant fan of MMA and a degenerate gambler. So your tips go a very, very long way to keeping the lights on here at the Die Hard MMA podcast. And I have some big ideas coming around the corner for the show. So stay tuned. You will want to be subscribed, and you will want to be tuned in. The Die Hard MMA podcast is going places in 2020. I keep teasing that, I know, but it's not 2020 yet, so you're going to have to hear it a couple more times. Let's knock out a quick recap of UFC Moscow. I don't want to waste a lot of time this week. This is probably going to be a bit of a shorter episode. We had 5 bets, and 4 of those bets were underdogs. The strategy worked perfectly, but the one bet that I made that was supposed to be essentially our free money, guaranteed profit pick out of the 5, shit the bed. and that was very disappointing. We posted negative 0.15 units, which is less than a quarter. I mean, damn near broke even on the thing, so I'm not even going to sweat it, but I am a little bit bummed about a couple of things, so let's run over that real quick here. Dalucha Longiambula, I mean, plus 310. What do you want from me? I took the shot. He's a plus 310 underdog. He did not, he really wasn't even in that fight. He was not competitive. I thought he was going to save gas and explode and go for it. Instead, he was the one that got exploded on. He got KO'd out of there. Disappointing, but we knew there was an opportunity for that considering how big of an underdog he was. It's not like we really expected him to go in there and steamroll, but I didn't expect him to flop on his back and just get wrecked the way that he did. Anthony Rocco Martin, masterful performance. He was a plus 140 underdog when we locked him up, and he put on a show. I was completely confident watching that fight that we had that win locked up. That was great. And the same thing with Edge Short Fuse Herman. Like I said in the podcast, breaking down that fight, it was a great stylistic matchup. He really put his veteran savvy to use against a young green kid that if he can't get it done using his gas tank and his explosiveness in the first round, he's got nothing left. Something to keep in mind going forward when dealing with him. That may have actually been Ed Herman's retirement fight. I'm glad to hear that he didn't call it his retirement fight beforehand, but from what I see on social media, he's thinking about hanging it up, which honestly, probably not a bad idea for him at this stage in his career. There's not a whole lot of people he's going to be able to beat, but we rocked that plus 155 and stole it. Now, Zalim Imadaev, the biggest bed shitter out there for me. I cannot figure Danny Hot Chocolate Roberts out. Every single time I break down a fight for that guy, he bites me in the ass. If I think, oh, he looked good his last fight, he looked okay, he's got some pieces, some skills, he's probably going to show up and look really good, but then he doesn't. Then he just gets wrecked. And the same thing here. I was fading his chin. That's essentially all I was doing here with Zalim, who should be the exact type of fighter that he would struggle with, not be able to stop. But he pulled wrestling out of his back pocket that I specifically said on the podcast that he doesn't have. So that was a little embarrassing. It's okay, though. We only risked minus 110. We didn't lay the chalk on him. We took him inside the distance. So that padded our loss a decent amount. Can't believe he got finished, though. That's what shocked me. The fact that he didn't lose like a hairy decision, but got knocked out cold. Crazy stuff, man. I love this sport. And then Calvin Kattar in the main event. He didn't get it done for us either, but that was one hell of a fight. An absolute back and forth battle. And you know what? I truly believe that Calvin Kattar very much could have won that fight if it had gone a full 5 rounds the way most main events do. Now, obviously, that's not a guarantee. If they had trained for a 5-round fight, maybe it's just the same thing over 5 instead of over 3. We don't know that, but I've seen weaknesses in Magomed Sharipov as far as his gas tank goes and stuff like that later in the rounds. I want to see him in a 5-round fight and see if that's actually a problem or if he trains specifically for 3-round fights and knows where his gas tank lets up and that's just kind of part of his style. I'd be very curious to see. The one big serious regret that I have on this fight is that I passed on Alexander Volkov. I talked to you all on the podcast and I told you that there was value on Volkov by decision, and in hindsight, always 2020 hindsight, this stuff is so super clear after the fights have already played out. But I mean, I nailed it. I absolutely nailed that breakdown. Greg Hardy is nowhere near the caliber of Volkov. It was too big of a step up too soon. Volkov, coming off of the Black Beast loss, didn't want to get into a firefight, just wanted to get the W and get out of there. And because of that, it was an easy 3-round coasting decision for Alexander Volkov. And we could have locked up, I think it was plus 245 or something like that on that prop bet. Oh, man, you know what? That's one of those ones that if it had been hairy at all, if he had ever been in danger of losing, or even if he had like really dropped Greg Hardy, I wouldn't be worried about it. I wouldn't have felt bad about it. But it was perfectly, exactly to the letter what I predicted and said could very likely happen. And at plus 265, I didn't have the guts to pull the trigger. And I'm glad we passed. I'm glad we didn't take a bet on Greg Hardy. I know I sprinkled it just, personally speaking, but I warned people not to touch that fight because of exactly the way that it panned out. Greg Hardy's going to need a little bit more time, but again, he gave a good showing of himself. That is another fight where he stepped up and he showed he's got the raw pieces. I mean, if this guy keeps going the way he does, he still could very much turn into something. But that's enough. We are now 10 minutes into the podcast, and normally I like to chit-chat a little bit more than that, but not today, Zerg. Let's get right on in to UFC Sao Paulo. The very first fight of the night, we are kicking off with the women bantamweight division. Vanessa Melo 9-6-0 takes on Tracy Cortez, who is 6-1-0. And this is a fight that I want literally nothing to do with. Vanessa Melo, she had a rough start to her MMA career, got the ship righted, and then after going on a 5-fight win streak, made her UFC debut against Ariane, where she got outclassed over 15 minutes. On the flip side of this, we've got a young green Tracy Cortez, who she's got a good record. She's 6-1-0, so she potentially could be something. She's coming off the Contender Series, and she did have a 3-fight amateur career that she appears to have done pretty well in. I am not putting any stock into this fight. I really want nothing to do with this one. It's one to log away for information. I have no reads on it, so let's not spend any time on it. Now, the second fight of the night at women's flyweight division is Ariane Lipski taking on Veronica Macedo. And this fight, ladies and gentlemen, is very interesting. I have interest in Ariane Lipski versus Veronica Macedo, so let's break it down. Ariane Lipski is the violence queen, and I'm not sure she really fits the name just yet. I need to see a little bit more violence from her before I'm willing to call her that moving forward. She is... Let me get over here to my stats. We've got 11-5 for Ariane Lipski taking on my girl, Veronica Macedo, who is 6-3-1. And you may wonder why she's my girl, and you may say that's a shit record, Clint. And you know what? It is. But we have talked about this before, actually. We were on Veronica Macedo taking on Polyana Viana in her last fight just a couple months ago, and she won by first round armbar. This girl is putting it together, and she's putting it together fast. She is 24 years old, and she is dating Khalil Roundtree. Yeah, I thought that was worth mentioning. So she steps into the octagon and takes on Ashley Evans-Smith. Now, Ashley Evans-Smith isn't the greatest women's fighter, but she is tough, and she is UFC caliber. She's not the kind of person that you really want to be making your UFC debut against. She's got high-level experience. Well, poor Veronica Macedo just wasn't quite ready. So in round 3, she got TKO'd, unfortunately, which not good. But she bounces back and she takes it on Andrea KGB Lee, who we all know how high I am on Andrea KGB Lee. This girl has got the goods. She's going to be a problem moving forward. She herself is a young women's fighter that's moving up the ranks, has serious athleticism and power, and Macedo, even though she lost that fight, was able to go a full 15 minutes with her. After that, they gave her Jillian Robertson. I mean, they put her through the meat grinder. You all know I love my girl Jillian Robertson. Savaged all over Veronica Macedo. She got the rear naked choke, finished her in round 2. So everyone thought this girl was washed up. She was a scrub. She's got nothing. But even in those losses, I'm seeing flashes of brilliance. She's only 24 years old. She's aggressive. She comes forward. She's very well-rounded, surprisingly, even though she's been finished by KO and also by submission. She is explosive. She's very slick off her back. She attacks with submissions off of from the bottom very, very quickly. And when she fought Jillian Robertson, she was actually able to outmuscle and out-scramble her early in round 1, which I know it didn't keep up over the course of the full fight, but that in itself is impressive to me. If you can out-muscle and out-physical Jillian Robertson, that is a big deal. Now, she's stepping up against Ariane Lipski here on short notice. Ariane was supposed to be given a complete trash can and get-right fight. She herself is coming off of 2 unanimous decision losses to Joanne Calderwood and Molly McCann. Now, again, same thing as Veronica. Ariane had to face 2 really solid opponents. JoJo Calderwood is another one of my girls, and Molly McCann is so much better than people gave her credit for. So Lipski is 5'3" with a 67-inch reach. She lands 4.03 significant strikes per minute so far in the UFC, absorbing 6.43. So she's been outstruck by a full 2 significant strikes per minute. Now, again, that was against heavy-handed, well-rounded strikers like JoJo Calderwood and Molly McCann. So not a perfect representation of her, but she's very slow. She looks for the counter. She's very hittable. She doesn't really move her head all that well, and she's very, very subject to physical, like bodily takedowns. If you can get the body clinch on her, if you can lift her up off her feet, she's kind of a fish out of water. She only has a 40% takedown defense rating. My girl Macedo, on the flip side of this thing, she is 6'4". She has a 64-inch reach, so she'll be at a 3-inch reach disadvantage. She only averages 1.9 significant strikes per minute, but that's because she's been doing a lot of grappling, and she has absorbed 3.61 significant strikes per minute, again, because a lot of her action has taken place on the mat, and she's been kind of the receiving end of it while she looks for submissions. And this fight is crazy to me, because I think Veronica Macedo is very, very much in a primed spot to play spoiler here. I would not be at all surprised if she submits Ariane Lipski in this fight. She doesn't like the aggression of her opponents. If she can't keep that mid-tier range, she struggles. So I think Veronica Macedo is going to be able to strike effectively from the outside. She will be able to quickly close the distance and get in, deal damage inside, and then get out, which means she will completely be avoiding the range that Ariane Lipski likes to fight at. She's gonna cause her problems. And if she is able to get the takedown, if she's able to get the clinch, then that's going to be her world. She is leagues above Ariane Lipski on the mat. So even if this thing does end up hitting the ground and she's on bottom, she very much has the chance of throwing up a triangle or an armbar and landing it. Of the two fighters, I think Macedo has a much better chance of finishing this fight. She's going to come out angry, fast, and mean, looking to push the pace, especially because she's coming on short notice. We don't know what kind of fight shape she was in. I want to say that she was actually booked up to face somebody else, and then she dropped that fight. Amanda Lemos. She was booked to fight Amanda Lemos, and that was in December. So she is taking a short notice fight, but that means she was already in camp. She was already getting ready to go. So she shouldn't be like out of shape off the couch or anything like that. I think we've got a great opportunity to ride the wave with Veronica Macedo before she really announces herself to the UFC and the public in general. I do definitely enjoy this spot, and I will be taking a stab with my girl Veronica Macedo at, if I could find the line, -120. We can get her at -120 right now, and I think that's more than fair. Just a little bit less than a pick'em price. She is a slight favorite, and I do love that. This is one where I will more than definitely be sprinkling on Veronica Macedo inside the distance. I think she can absolutely get it done and get Lipski out of there, and that's at +320. I'm not making that an official pick, but I do think that she's the type of fighter that goes in or goes out on her shield a la Nico Price, and if that's the case, I don't know if she's going to win this thing by decision. So anyway, big bet straight, -120. Let's go. The next fight is a men's featherweight fight between Douglas Silva de Andrade versus Renan Barão. Now, Douglas de Silva is 34 years old, and he's 25-3. Renan Barão is somehow the younger fighter here, 32 years old, 34-8. And this is a sad, sad tale. Renan Barão is very quickly getting into BJ Penn territory where it's like, why do you keep doing this? And it's just starting to get worse. He's on a 4-fight losing streak, and he lost his last fight against Luke Sanders by KO in round 2. After he lost his belt, TJ Dillashaw KO'd Barão badly back in 2015 and basically took his soul. Ever since then, he's gotten one win, and the rest of his fights have all been losses. He is 1-6 in his last 7 fights, with the one win coming by decision over Felipe Nover, who isn't in the UFC anymore. And he's lost to decent names: Brian Kelleher, Aljo Sterling, Andre Ewell, Jeremy Stevens. But then when you dip down to Luke Sanders, it's like they're trying to give you, a little bit of a lower level there, and then you get KO'd stiff. So not only is he still slipping, but his durability appears to be dropping out as well. Barão is a complete train wreck, and you need to stay completely away from him. Douglas de Silva de Andrade on the other side of this thing is basically miniature Vitor Belfort. He shaves his head just like Vitor, and it seriously looks like you hit Vitor with a shrink ray. He's got the exact same physicality and body type, and I think he's got the same doctor as Vitor Belfort, if you know what I mean. He is on some serious medication. He does keep his hands up, which I like. He protects his chin, uses his shoulders and arms to block shots. He throws heavy leg kicks. He does cut off the cage well. That's one thing I like about him, is when he's stalking his opponents, he doesn't chase them. He actually tends to get in front of them so he can control where the fight takes place. He has this really sneaky step-in uppercut that I really like. He lands that pretty well. He's very physical with his takedowns. He does move in transition to the back of his opponents very well, and he's got very good body control. I mean, Douglas Silva is basically, he's very, very well-rounded. I mean, back in 2018, he got a win over Marlon Chito Vera. He's coming off of a corner stoppage against Peter Yan, which, I mean, Peter Yan basically steamrolls and wrecks everybody, so that's not overly surprising. But he is basically going hot and cold, 1 win, 1 loss, 1 win, 1 loss. So this is a fight where somehow the UFC is trying to springboard an older fighter off of a younger one. Because Renan Barão, I just don't know how he's 32. The way he's fighting, he seems like he's 37. I think they're trying to give Douglas Silva a win here. Now, both these guys are Brazils, so it's Brazil on Brazil action here in the UFC in Sao Paulo. So at least one of the Brazilians is coming away with a win. And the way that Barão got KO'd by Luke Sanders, I mean, the heat that Andrade throws, the heat that he's going to have, especially, in Brazil, Brazilian fighters seem to get a little bit of a extra push. I don't know if USADA looks the other way or what, but they seem to look and act a little bit better when they're in Brazil. So I honestly think De Andrade probably KO wrecks Renan Barão. It's not a spot that I would feel comfortable necessarily betting. I mean, I think that you could moneyline parlay De Andrade if you like to do things like that. Renan Barão is in the plus 200 range right now. De Silva, why do I keep messing this guy's name up? Douglas De Andrade is minus 240 in that ballpark, so he's prime parlay space. If you want to parlay him with somebody else, I think this is a great fight to do so. Renan Barão still has his power. That's kind of the only thing left. So, I mean, he could very well clip this guy, but I just don't necessarily see that happening. I'm not willing to lay on it myself. I am going to pass on this fight because there's a couple of other spots that I like, and as much as I do think Barão is shot, I'm still not overly trusting of Douglas Silva. So I'm going to stay off this one. Let's move right on down the line. Our next fight is at welterweight, where we've got Warlley Alves taking on Randy Rude Boy Brown. And this is a fight that I'm going to tell you right off the bat, I'm passing here. I went back and forth. I can't make a call on this fight. And because of that, I'm going to have to pass. I know people have strong opinions on both sides of this fight, and I think that's valid, which is one of the reasons why I need to force myself to avoid it, because I really did want to make a play on this one. Warlley Alves is 13-3. He's going to be the Brazilian homeboy. He is 28 years old. Randy Brown is 29, and he is 11-3. So the issue that I've got, let's talk about Warlley here for a second. So Warlley Alves takes the UFC by storm, wins his first 4 fights, and then he gets derailed by Bryan Barberena. After that, he loses to Kamaru Usman. Now, in 2016, Bryan Barberena was a complete motherfucker, and Usman is the current champion, so neither of those losses are bad in hindsight. He also submitted Colby Covington. He's the one guy to get it done against Colby Covington. I mean, literally, Colby's only got 1 loss on his record, and it was to this man. He has 2 wins after that, and then he gets KO'd stiff by James Krause, who we will talk about later. His next fight, he bounces back with a win against Sérgio Moraes. He wins that one by impressive 3rd-round KO as well. But I have a little bit of an issue with that one. Moraes isn't exactly an all-star, and he was kind of a perfect setup for Alves. The other thing is Alves is a very hot and cold fighter. And I don't mean just in respect to his record. He's, so he looks completely different from fight to fight. And I don't know that this is a USADA issue necessarily. I'm not saying, so his body does look different, but I don't know that it's because he's on or off performance enhancing drugs. I think it's an effort. I think it's a motivation issue. And because of that, you never know which Warlley Alves is showing up to the fight. Even in some of the fights that he's won, he has not looked overly impressive in. And in the fights that he's lost, he's looked completely terrible and completely outclassed. He's 5'11", he's got a 72-inch reach, and looking at his significant strikes, he lands 3.16 and he absorbs 3.75. So over the course of his career, he has been absolutely being outstruck by the majority of his opponents. He's got an 80% takedown defense, and he is dangerous on the ground if it gets there. This is not the fight that I expect to go to the ground, but bears mentioning. Randy Brown on the flip side of this thing, he's 6'3", so he's going to be much taller, and he's got a 78-inch reach advantage. He's going to have the reach advantage here for sure. He averages 3.48 significant strikes per minute, and he absorbs 2.56. So he is outstriking his opponents as opposed to being outstruck by his opponents, and he has fought guys at a much lower level, which is kind of the problem. He's had more fights in the UFC, but like I said, he's been facing guys like Eric Montano, Brian Camozzi. Now, he did fight Bilal Muhammad. He fought Mickey Gall, which, meh. He fought Nico Price. That's the one where he got KO'd from bottom on, which, I mean, crazy that he was just kind of unfortunate to get caught in that situation. And then he came back and mauled Brian Barberena over a 3-round fight back in June, which totally caught me off guard. So up until this point, you're going, Clint, what's the big deal? Bet Randy Brown. He's the hotter fighter right now. He's the more reliable fighter right now. And he outstrikes all of his opponents. He's got some very dangerous people on his record. They're roughly a pick'em. Why aren't you taking this guy? Well, because Randy Brown is also a hot and cold fighter. I've told you all time and time again, we were on Nico Price when we faded Randy Brown. We were actually on Brian Barberena back in June when he showed up and gave us the upset. And he didn't look great against Mickey Gall. He didn't put Mickey Gall away, who's a complete trash can. They went to a 3-round decision, and he got dominated by Bilal Muhammad. I thought Randy Brown was going to get cut. I'll be completely honest. After the Nico Price fight, I thought this kid was getting his walking papers. I assumed that Brian Barberena was going to be too much for him to handle, and he was just not going to be UFC level. Turns out I may have been wrong. I may have misjudged Randy Brown, and that's another reason that I want to stay away from this fight, because I'm not entirely sure where Randy Brown is. Did he show up for one good fight? Was he that good and Nico Price just clipped him so we didn't really get to see the extent of his evolution at that point? Was that a one-fight flash in the pan and he's not going to look as good in this one? I don't know the answers to those questions. And I also don't know what Warlley Alves is going to show up. He is in Brazil. He is 28 years old. Both these guys should be coming into their physical primes as fighters. So you're hoping that both of them are ramping up. I have no information to go off as to which one of these guys is actually going to take it home. This is going to be a hell of a fight. I think these two are going to stand and bang because that's mostly what the two of them do. I'll bet you somebody goes to sleep. When the totals come out later on, I'll be very curious to see where they set that number, and I will again look at the fight and potentially have a play on a total. But because of the way they match up and because both of them have been so up and down in their careers, it's a stay away fight for me. I can't pick either one of these guys and trust my money with them this weekend. Our next fight is at lightweight, where Francisco Trinaldo is taking on Bobby King Green. Francisco Trinaldo is 23-7 when he's 41 years old. Bobby Green is 24-9. He is only 33. Now, those are a couple of guys where the age might shock you. Trinaldo has been fighting basically forever. He's finally gotten over that hump. He is 41. Bobby Green has got a very long fight record himself. He kind of almost reminds me of a Masvidal. He's been doing it basically forever, but he's still just barely over the edge of 30 years old. It's kind of incredible how long this guy has been fighting and how much experience he has to still not even be 35. And he still got it too. And that's kind of part of my angle here. So Francisco Trinaldo, in his last fight against Alexander Hernandez, that was one that we cashed in on. And if you remember, there was a giant outrage on Twitter. Everyone thought Trinaldo was a live dog. everyone was betting Trinaldo, and everyone cried robbery when the hometown Texas judges gave the win to Alexander Hernandez. And rewatching that fight, I still think Alexander Hernandez won that fight. And not just because I bet him, because Trinaldo didn't do shit. He had all the opportunities in the world to get in there and actually take that fight, and he refused to. He could not pull the trigger. And oh, what a difference a year makes. He came off of a KO to Evan Dunham in September of 2018, looking like he was turning back the clock, and then runs into Hernandez and just couldn't get off. One of the things that I noticed really frustrated him was his movement. Alexander Hernandez's movement really seemed to shut Trinaldo down. He didn't feel like he had a safe option anywhere in that fight. He does still have heavy hands. He does still carry his power. He doesn't throw as much spinning shit these days. I think he's getting too old for that. He might break a hip. He does still stalk his opponents down, though. He's heavy, flat-footed, and he does have a really good get-up game. He scrambles real well. He's got good top control. He's a beast on the mat, and if it gets there, he probably does have an advantage, but I don't know that it's going to. He doesn't seem overly interested in the ground game these days. He's 5'9". He lands 3.16 significant strikes per minute, and he only absorbs 2.42. So he does slightly outland his opponents, although he is a much more measured pace type of fighter, and he can tend to slow down in round 3. He does seem to have a little bit of a gas tank issue. He lands about 1 takedown per 15 minutes, and he has a 63% takedown defense. Bobby King Green on the flip side of this thing, he is tall, he's explosive, he's long and athletic. He's got really good hand movement, head movement, and footwork. He strikes in combos, and that's something I absolutely love. It's not just one pot shot at a time. He's always throwing 3, 4, 5 shots in a row. There's always something coming afterward. He volumes his opponents. He's really good at range, and he's really fast. Now, if it hits the mat, he also has good top control. He scrambles really well. He doesn't spend a whole lot of time on the ground, but he's not exactly a stranger to it either. He does every once in a while overextend on his punches, and that's a little bit of a concern. I want to mention that because it's entirely possible that he throws a big shot, overextends, and gets body locked by Francisco Trinaldo. I could absolutely see that happening in this fight. He's 5'10". He's got a 71-inch reach, and he lands 5.11 significant strikes per minute. He only absorbs 3.87, and he has a 75% takedown defense. I think Bobby Green is the play here, man. He is a plus 105 underdog right now, and I am going to take it. I don't think Trinaldo's got it anymore. Now, we talked about my magic number, 40 years old. You don't bet fighters over 40 unless you've got a very good reason to. This is a spot where if you're looking at betting Francisco Trinaldo, I would encourage you to potentially pass. If he does pull off this fight, we're getting close to the end here. He's definitely fading. He's definitely slowing down. And the cuts down to 155 have got to be taking a toll on this guy. He's a complete muscle tank. And I can just see the degradation of his skills over his last couple of fights. Bobby Green is going to out-volume this guy. He's going to keep him at range. If Francisco Trinaldo can't catch him with a big shot, or like I said before, if he can't get that clinch takedown, if he can't get that body lock when Bobby Green makes a mistake, I see Bobby basically just staying on the outside and roughing him up for the entire fight. Bobby Green is on a little bit of a skid. He lost to Barboza by decision in 2014. He did get KO'd by Poirier in 16, and then he lost a split, close contested fight to Rashid Magomedov in 2017. He got to the point where it looked like he might be retiring. Then his fight with Lando Venata was actually something crazy. Venata landed a big illegal shot on him in the first round after rocking him legitimately. So he had been hurt and then hurt again, and Lando got a point deducted. Bobby Green dug deep and came back and forced that fight to a draw. I mean, he still has that dog in him. He won a fight against Eric Koch in 2018, and then at the end of 2018, he fought my boy Drakkar Klose, who I'm very, very, very high on. But you know what? I think he won that fight. Bobby Green actually, quote-unquote, retired after he lost to Drakkar Klose because he was so pissed off about that decision, and he had every right to be. I think he beat Drakkar Klose in December of 2018. I absolutely think that he won that fight. So as far as his record's concerned, it says he's got a loss. In my book, he's on a 2-fight win streak, and I think that with the way Trinaldo fought against Hernandez, his fear of pulling the trigger, and his inability to deal with the speed and the movement of a guy like Hernandez, Bobby Green is going to pose those exact same problems. Let's go Bobby Green, plus 105. Next up, we've got Ricardo Ramos taking on Luiz Eduardo Garagorri in the featherweight division. Ricardo Ramos is 13-2-0, a fighter that I'm very high on, and Garagorri is 12-0, undefeated, 30 years old, in his second UFC fight. And this is a fight that I am not at all interested in from a betting perspective, but I am very interested from a viewing perspective. This kid, Eduardo, is legit. He has 4 KOs, 6 submissions, 3 decisions, 13-0, undefeated. Stepped in against Humberto Bandenet earlier this year and won with a convincing 3-round decision, and he was on a tear, wrecking and finishing people outside the UFC before that. Ricardo Ramos in your second fight in the UFC, though, is a very, very tall order. I am high on this kid. However, it is still only his 5th UFC fight. Now, 5 UFC fights, that's a decent chunk of experience, but he is still very, very young. He's only 24 years old versus Garagorri's 30 years old. And I think this is going to be a very, very interesting matchup. So let's look at some of the numbers here. Ramos is 5'6". He's got a 69-inch reach, and he has an output of 3.8 significant strikes per minute. He absorbs 3.26. He lands about 1.7 takedowns over every 15 minutes with a 63% accuracy. So he hits almost 2 takedowns per fight, and when he wants them, he generally gets them. 63 is relatively high for a takedown accuracy rating, and that means he's not chain wrestling. Usually you'll see the guys that have a low takedown percentage but a high takedown average. Those are the Colby Covingtons, the guys that take you down and maul you over and over and over and over. When Ricardo Ramos gets you down, generally speaking, it doesn't take him a whole lot of tries to do so, and he keeps you there. He's got a 75% takedown defense himself. Garagorri on the other side of this thing is 5'9". He has a 70-inch reach, so he will have a 1-inch reach advantage and a 3-inch height advantage. And his numbers are going to be untrustworthy because he only has 1 UFC fight for us to look at here. Now, he averaged 4.33 significant strikes per minute over the course of that fight, absorbing 2.13 significant strikes per minute. He only landed 1 takedown, so he's got an astounding 100% takedown accuracy rating, and He's got a 60% takedown defense rating. He gave up 4 takedowns to Humberto Bandenet. And here's the reason why I think the line is the way that it is. Giving up 4 takedowns to a guy like Bandenet means Ricardo Ramos should have no problem taking you down. I mean, that's why the line is the way that it is. Ramos is a minus 280 favorite right now with the comeback on Garagorri at plus 240. And y'all know me, I love to take my dog shots. I really feel like that line is too wide, but I don't know enough about Garagorri to actually be able to trust him. And I know you don't have to really trust fighters, kind of like last week on DeLucha. You don't have to trust them when you're getting the right line to throw a little bit of cash on them, but I do still want to be relatively protective of my money. I don't want to just throw money on every single big dog, because that's not exactly how it works. You've got to pick the right big dogs, and Garagorri's got to show me something. This is a large step up in competition. Ramos is far and away the best fighter that he's faced over the course of his entire career. It is only going to be his second UFC fight, so there may still be some jitters. Even though he's got a full 15 minutes under his belt, you don't know if that's enough. And Ramos is a very tall order, so I think Ramos takes him down. I think Ramos smothers him. It's probably going to be a decision win for Ricardo Ramos, but I don't feel comfortable putting my money anywhere near that, and I'm going to be watching very, very closely. This is definitely a bank that information type of situation. I want to know exactly how this thing is going to go, and then give myself... Whoa, hold the phone. I'm looking over at 5 dimes right now. And Ricardo Ramos winning by 3-round decision is plus 140. That's bonkers. I'm going to need to look into that. So I'm not saying it's an official bet. But that's an interesting line. If you can get Ramos by decision at plus 140, this is a 3-round fight against an undefeated fighter. I need to do some serious research on Garagorri to see just how good his grappling is and to see how durable he is, because if he's got some decent durability and he's got some decent grappling. This is maybe a fight that would go to the cards, and if that's the case, I think that's kind of a steal on Ramos at plus 140. So sorry about that. Literally just saw that as I'm doing the podcast that you could get plus money on Ramos to go the distance. I mean, the fight going the distance is minus 155. So, I mean, it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me why the line is the way that it is. Garagorri wins by 3-round decision is plus 360, and Ramos wins by decision is plus 140, with Ramos winning inside the distance at plus 195. I don't know if that's like a math error. I don't know if somebody fucked this up, but that seems like a lot of extra juice. Usually they do something like this, like Ramos would be minus 110 to win by 3-round decision, and then plus 170 or something like that to win inside the distance. I'm shocked to see the extra juice on both of those lines, considering the bookmaker expects this thing to go the full 3 rounds. So just put a little circle around that one. Maybe circle back to that one. I'm still going to pass for right now, but I'm going to do a little more tape study on this one. Keep an eye on that Twitter. Twitter is at DieHardMMAPod. Feel free to hit me up over there if you have any questions or if you just want to run something by me as far as the betting card goes. I also just like to chat with my followers. You guys are awesome. I love you all at the Die Hard MMA Podcast. You guys have no idea how much fun I have doing this podcast. It's something that I really, really enjoy. So I appreciate each and every one of you that follows, whether you're listening to this thing on some type of podcast platform or whether you're on YouTube, whether you follow me and interact with me on Instagram or Twitter. I love you all. You guys are awesome. Our next fight is the main event of the prelims, where Sergio Moraes takes on James Krause, the James Krause. Sergio Moraes is 14-5-1. He is 37 years old, and James Krause is 26-7. He is only 33 years old. And this is a fight that I absolutely love. So Sergio Moraes is a world Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu champion at the black belt level. Dude is slick and legit on the ground. He does throw seriously heavy hands, though, with reckless abandon, because he is not afraid of the takedown. He reminds me a lot of Demian Maia. He's got the same exact style. He's a world-class jiu-jitsu fighter that paired some striking with that game, and instead of having the chain grappling of Demian Maia, he just goes for it, man. He's not afraid to get into a firefight on the feet because he does have some heavy hands, and when he rocks people, he uses that to transition on the ground or take people down. He is weak to leg kicks, though. That's something that we've seen repeatedly in his last 3 fights or so. He has no answer whatsoever to leg kicks. Rocco Martin and Warlley Alves absolutely busted him up going to the legs. Speaking of Warlley Alves, we talked about him a little bit earlier in the night. This was one of his motivation fights. He showed up against Sergio Moraes and absolutely mauled him on the feet over the course of 15 minutes. And he suffered and when I say Sergio suffered a scary knockout loss when facing Warlley Alves. He took a flying knee and was already rocked up seriously bad, and then Warlley stepped in with this giant uppercut that just landed flush, and Sergio dropped like a sack of potatoes. He was so done. And this was in May. This was 6 months ago. Those of you who are new to the show, some of the unwritten rules of the Die Hard MMA podcast, the rules that I go by as far as my betting is concerned, is you've got to be cautious about people coming off of short KO losses. If you take a bad KO loss, you need to take 9 months off. Otherwise, I'm considering fading you. And this is a perfect spot to fade Moraes, in my opinion. He's coming off of that terrible KO loss less than 6 months ago. He's 37 years old, so he's getting very close to that 40 years old. James Krause has the skill set to cause this guy problems. Krause, this is just his second fight back up at 170 pounds. He was trying to get down to 155, and it was wearing on him. He's a lot like my boy Gilbert Durinho Burns, moving up to 170 after just not being able to manage that 155 cut any longer. And he's looked like a new man. He is huge at 170. He's not out of place at 170 at all. In fact, he's been bigger than most of his recent opponents since he did move back. Well, I say most of, he only had one, which was Warlley Alves. Both of these guys' last opponent was Warlley Alves, by the way. Fun fact for everybody listening. One of them lost by KO. The other won by KO. James Krause TKO'd Warlley Alves in the second round, and that's one where I'm not sure if Warlley Alves had a letdown fight or if James Krause just looked that freaking good coming back up to 170. It may have been somewhere in the middle where a little bit of both are true. Now, James Krause is really big and strong for the division. He scrambles and sweeps well. He is strong in the clinch. He works well up against the cage, and he fights with constant pressure, constant forward movement, constantly throwing his jab in your face. He spams front kicks, teeps to the body, to the midsection, which I absolutely love. Working the body is like working the legs, in my opinion. It just sucks the gas out of your opponents, and it makes it easy to put them away. Well, not easy, but you know what I mean. It makes it easier to put them away later in fights. He's got really good head movement, and he has really good in and out footwork and body movement. He also is a black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. Now, he's not the level of black belt that can hang with someone like Sergio Moraes, but in a MMA fight where it's not all ground game, where it's not all, oh, hey, we're just going to grapple and go for the submission, he will be able to hang. If you put these guys in a BJJ match, I think Moraes takes it all day. But this is MMA. There's going to be wrestling involved. There's going to be striking involved. And Krause is, in my opinion, the much more well-rounded fighter in this spot. So Sergio Moraes, he's got a 72-inch reach, and he's 6 feet tall. Krause is 6'2", and this was a 155er. He's 6'2" with a 73-inch reach. So he's going to have a 2-inch height advantage, a 1-inch reach advantage. And generally speaking, Moraes gets outstruck by his opponents. He averages 2.38 significant strikes per minute and gets hit with 3.43 significant strikes per minute. He does have a 75% takedown defense rating, but who really is trying to take down Sergio Moraes? Krause, on the flip side of this thing, averages 4.57 significant strikes per minute, so a much higher paced fighter, and he absorbs 4.15. So he does get more into battles. He's outstriking his opponents, although not by much, simply because he's willing to trade. Now, that has led to, he's got 7 KOs on his record. The dude's got some serious hands, and like we saw in the Warlley Alves fight, even against big, strong, durable 170-pounders, he can put these guys down. I think Krause is on the upside right now, and I think Sergio Moraes is on the downslide right now. This is a buy low, sell high spot on both sides of this fight, and I love James Krause. The only problem is the line. James Krause is minus 190 to minus 200, and while I do think that he wins this fight, I don't want to lay that kind of wood for this guy. Sergio Moraes is plus 165, plus 170, somewhere in that ballpark. What we are going to do is hop on over to the props section. We can find James Krause inside the distance at plus 225. Yes, you heard that right. We are getting a minus 200 favorite and completely flipping the line on its head to take him inside the distance and turn him into a big, fat, juicy dog at plus 225. The way James Krause handled Warlley Alves in his last fight, and then the way that Warlley Alves handled Sergio Moraes, I just think that this almost never happens. In MMA, you will never find a fighter A beats fighter B beats fighter C type of situation. It's more like Pokemon Elements, where fire beats water, water beats... Fire beats grass, grass beats water, water beats fire. It's more of a round table than it is a paper, rock, scissors, which is a round table. I am talking out of my ass right now. I totally blew that point. I'm sorry. It's more of a paper, rock, scissors than a lineal A, B, C type of situation. Sorry about that. I hope you all got a good laugh out of that, because I sound like a freaking idiot, and I'm not going to delete it from the podcast. You're welcome. So, James Krause has the exact same weapons that Warlley Alves has, and he just wrecked Warlley Alves, who is coming off of demolishing Sergio Moraes using those same exact weapons. The leg kicks are going to be huge. I think James Krause is going to work the legs, work the body. I think he will be bigger and stronger and be able to keep this fight standing. Since he's able to keep this fight standing, Moraes is only going to have the big bomb option, and I really don't think he's going to be able to get there. We might lose this one with James Krause playing it safe and sticking to the outside, but the way that he went after Warlley Alves and just broke him down, and that was a round 2 knockout, mind you, so he got it done early. It wasn't like it was a last second, third round KO. I think he can do the exact same thing to Sergio Moraes, and I feel really, really good about taking him inside the distance at that nice juicy line of plus 225. We have made it to the main card where we get started with Markus Perez taking on Wellington Turman. This is an interesting fight, and I don't say that as much as I used to because I worked on it and practiced it because I know it probably got annoying, but I'm bringing it back. This is a really good fight, and I'm really curious about this one. Markus Perez is 11-2, and he's taking on Wellington Turman, who is 15-3. Turman is only 23 years old, and Perez is 29. This is a super interesting spot because both of them are about the same point in their careers. The younger Turman actually has more fighting experience than Perez did as far as the octagon goes. Perez is coming into his fighting prime. Turman is at that age where you can see some rapid growth, and he stepped into the octagon facing Karl Roberson, and Karl Roberson is a beast. The fact that he was able to work Karl Roberson and took that fight to a split decision, very impressive. Taking that first L for the UFC, step up in competition, that's a big deal. I've got a very healthy respect for Karl Roberson. So the fact that Turman was able to step up and take that as his first fight and do as well as he did, that's impressive. Markus Perez on the flip side of this thing is another fighter that I'm actually relatively impressed with. He came out of LFA, I say he came out of LFA, he only had one fight in LFA, but in that LFA fight, he submitted our boy Ian the Hurricane Heinz, which that speaks just volumes to me. Heinz only has 2 losses on his record, one by decision most recently against Derek Brunson, who has found a career resurgence, and then one by submission. And that was this guy that got that submission done. So to me, that says an absolute shit ton of what this guy can do. He trains out of ATT. He's physically strong, and he uses that for his takedowns. He bodies people to the mat. He transitions back to people's backs really well. He's got some seriously high-level jiu-jitsu. He's got really good body control. Once he gets on your body, it's hard to get him off. He's got heavy hands, and he's really accurate from range. That's something I noticed. He really punches and keeps his opponents at the end of his punches, and he's pinpoint accurate on the jaw when he does that. I love that, especially with how heavy his hands are. He hits people accurately and hard. He's really strong in the clinch, and he's good working up against the cage. He does throw heavy kicks, and every once in a while he throws some spin and shit in there. He's got some really slick spinning elbows that I like. So he's got a lot going for him. The flip side of this thing with Wellington Turman, though, he was just promoted to Muay Thai black belt a couple days ago by his coach. So big accomplishment there. Congratulations to Turman. He's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, and this guy stands in the pocket. When he stepped in against Karl Roberson, he was ready to put one foot in the center of the octagon and swing until somebody fell. He was not scared one bit. This dude is full of piss and vinegar, and his confidence just bleeds out of him. He throws heavy leg kicks, and he is another guy that actually is very strong in the clinch, and he has good, hard body locks. Now, he uses that for heavy takedowns. These guys are very similar in that style. He does good work in the clinch, and he dives on submissions. The one thing with this guy is that he is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu brown belt, and he's willing to accept bottom position. He does dive on submissions. He attacks with arm bars and things like that off of his back, and that's honestly the thing that kind of worries me about him. The fact that he is willing to accept the bottom position is something that kind of throws up a red flag. He's not experienced enough to understand that you can't do that at the high level, I don't think. You'll see that a lot when people are very confident in their ground games. They're okay with accepting the bottom because they're just expecting that eventually they're going to go ahead and get that sub. He's not old enough to understand that if you get a guy that's got good submission defense and good wrestling, they'll just ride out on top of you, and unless you're Damian Maia level, you're not just going to hit that armbar every time. So if he accepts bottom position here against Markus Perez, I think Markus wins this thing running away. And Perez has a much higher level of competition than Turman does. Now, Turman did face Karl Robertson in his debut, which, like I said, very impressive. He's got a lot of experience. But Perez has fought guys like Ian Heinisch, Eric Anders, Anthony Hernandez, Andrew Sanchez. And I mean, the two guys that he lost to are Eric Anders and Andrew Sanchez. Two guys that make a living in the UFC at the highest level of out-athleting and out-strengthening their opponents. He is exactly like them, except he's got a better submission game. He really wants to rough up his opponents. He wants to clinch them. He wants to push them up against the cage, use the body lock, hit the takedown. I mean, I think he fights very similarly to Andrew Sanchez and Eric Anders, and they were just able to do that a little bit better than he is because I think they're bigger, stronger, more physical style athletes. I think he can do that to Wellington Turman here. Turman is coming off of his first loss in the UFC, which was his debut, so he's going to be really hungry, looking to get back in this thing. And as much as I want to take the shot on Perez, I just don't think I can. Right now, it's close to a pick'em. You can get Turman at -120, it looks like. Oh, I'm sorry, Perez at -120. So you can get even money on Wellington Turman. This is one of those ones where if you gave me a free bet, if you're like, hey, Clint, here's $500, put it on this fight, and you have to put it on this fight, I've got to pick a side. I'm going with Perez. I think that he's got the skill set that it takes to nullify what Turman brings to the table, and Turman may still have a couple of bumps in the road, but I also don't want to stand in front of a runaway freight train. We've talked before about how taking that first step up in competition in the UFC, you've got those jitters, you've got the adrenaline dump. There's a lot of reasons why you can lose that first fight, especially fighting a guy the level of Karl Robertson and the way that Turman was in that fight. I mean, if he brings that level of fight to Perez, he just might get it done. So this is a very, very close fight. Another one that I'm very interested in watching, but I think I'm just going to have to play it safe and pass on this one at this point. The next fight is the Battle of the Contender Series. I'm not going to spend a whole ton of time on this one because this is another very clear and obvious pass for me. Antonio Arroyo is 9-2-0. Andre Muniz, 18-4. Antonio is 30 years old, whereas Muniz is 29 years old, and both of these guys actually had 2 stints on Dana White's Contender Series. Both of them have 2 wins on Dana White's Contender Series. This is a classic striker versus grappler fight. Arroyo has absolutely devastating leg kicks. He starts very, very fast. He's very athletic. He's tall and long, and he throws kicks like nothing else. I mean, serious power in his kicks. However, on the Contender Series, he got his kicks caught regularly and got thrown down to the floor. Muniz, on the flip side of this thing, is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt, and a high one at that. He's excellent off his back. He's able to stay tight and control his opponent's posture, and he's able to protect himself when he's off of his back. He is the type of Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner who's good enough to be on his back and submit people with regularity. He also transitions very, very well. He takes his opponent's backs and locks in those chokes. Once he gets your back, you're not getting him off. This is a striker versus grappler. I mean, if you made me pick one, I would lean Andre Muniz because I think he will be able to catch a kick of Arroyo and then get this thing to the mat. It's about a straight pick'em here. We've got -110s across the board, basically. You can see a couple spots where it's a little bit different. You can get Arroyo at +105. Muniz is down to -135, -125 in a couple of spots. So the market's really unsure as to where they want to go on this one, and I can absolutely see why. Whichever guy implements their game plan is going to win. It's a coin flip of a coin flip. Arroyo, if he throws those kicks like we've seen him do basically his entire career, he's either going to knock Muniz out or Muniz is going to catch one and put him on the ground. Well, if he gets put on the ground, he's getting choked out. So, yeah, this one's going to be a fun one to watch, but neither of these guys has any UFC experience. I'm kind of not sure why it's this high up the card when there are some other cards on the prelims that could have taken this slot, but I'm very interested in watching it, and it's going to answer a lot of questions for us. Both these guys have serious potential moving forward. All right, now we're getting to the good stuff. Here we are, the big 3, the main event, co-main event, and whatever the hell you call this fight that is just one spot removed from the spotlight. The appetizer, I guess, the pre-co-main event. Charles do Bronx Oliveira is taking on Jared Flash Gordon. And this is a fight that It's going to be fun to watch, but I don't understand what they're doing. Charles Oliveira has completely found his stride in the octagon. He had a real rough patch there where he couldn't figure out if he wanted to fight at 145 or 155. After he finally figured it out that he really belongs at 155 and kind of pulled his head out of his ass in 2017, he's been on a nonstop killing spree. He's on a 5-fight win streak. All 5 of those fights are coming by finish. The last one by KO, all 4 before that were by submission, and he hasn't seen a third round since he fought Anthony Pettis in 2016. This kid is on absolute fire. He's 27-8, and 18 of those 27 wins have come by way of submission. He's an extremely high-level submission guy. He's tall and long for the division, and he has very, very much improved his striking, has proven in his fight against Nick Lentz back in May. TKO'd the dude in round 2. His striking is definitely come along leaps and bounds. Jared Flash Gordon on the flip side of this thing is 15-3, and this guy's got one of the best stories you'll ever hear in the octagon. I mean, he was a complete mess. He was a drug addict, and he was on like crack and heroin. He posted like a mugshot of himself the other day. He's Florida man. He's literally Florida man. He posted a shot where he got arrested. He was so high on like heroin that he thought he had zits and he didn't. So he had like picked pieces of his face apart. I mean, really, just I can't believe the transformation of this man. He's now fighting at the highest level of mixed martial arts, and even though he's not doing all that great at the moment, like that turnaround is just huge. I'm a huge fan of his, and I hate this fight so much for him because of that. So he gets to the UFC, he rattles off 2 wins, he looks impressive, he looks like he's going places, and then he gets TKO'd by Diego Ferreira, and then he gets KO'd by Joaquim Silva, and coming off back-to-back knockout losses, he takes on Dan Moret. Dan Moret is a good measuring stick as far as what Charles Oliveira is going to look like physically speaking against Jared Gordon. And Gordon struggled. Gordon was very, very obviously just trying to eke out of there with a win. We took Gordon inside the distance at that spot because I thought he was going to bounce back and I thought he was going to do it violently. But something like I talked about on last week's podcast is I wasn't quite savvy to the fact that people will tone it down a lot of times in their comebacks from bad losses like that. We hadn't quite put that together yet at that point in time. So Gordon grinds out the decision over Dan Moret, but it's not impressive whatsoever in my opinion. He is a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt himself. He pairs that with good wrestling. He trains with Anthony Pettis out at Rufus Sport, so he's from a good gym. He's got good boxing, heavy hands, but he's willing to trade, and he's very hittable. He got rocked bad by Dan Moret, and he took some big knees from Dan Moret, and like I said, that's going to be a lot of what we see from Charles Oliveira. They're very similarly sized, and Oliveira is going to have the same physical advantages that Moret had over Gordon, except the difference is Oliveira loves being off of his back. So Gordon taking down Dan Moret and grinding on him to win that 15-round fight isn't going to be the same story against Charles Oliveira. Gordon will take him down, and Oliveira will be working for submissions, hammering him with elbows, dicing him up, kind of like Tony Ferguson does off of his back. He's not going to be safe whatsoever when this thing hits the mat. As a person, as a human being, my heart is rooting for Jared Gordon, but I don't see how he wins this fight. I absolutely don't. If you're going to put together some kind of a parlay, I think Charles Oliveira is the quote-unquote lock of the night. We don't use the L word here, but I don't see how Gordon beats Oliveira. Oliveira is ready to assault the top 15 of this division. He's primed and ready to go. It's his time. He's there. And Gordon is a guy who I think needs another fight or two to really get him where he needs to be if he's going to stick around in the UFC. This might be a spot where he takes a brutal loss to Oliveira and going 1-3, getting 3 of those by finish. I mean, he could get his walking papers after this one. I hope that's not the case, because I think Charles Oliveira is going to submit this guy. Gordon gives up his back. When he's in scrambles, when he's trying to get to his feet, when he's trying to, work his wrestling, he gives up opportunities to take his back. I think Oliveira wins this thing by rear naked choke, and the prop right now for Oliveira winning inside the distance is -180. And I can't touch that. Like, I can't lay 2-1 on a finish. Now, I do think that Oliveira is going to finish, But, I mean, maybe minus 140, minus 150, something like that. I'm not laying minus 180 type of wood for a finish. That's out of my ballpark. So unfortunately, I'm going to have to pass on this one. I do want to see the total. They're more than likely going to set it at 1.5, considering the run that Oliveira has been on. And I think that's probably the way to go. When he submitted Christos Giagos, it was at 3 minutes and 22 seconds, so just over that 1.5 mark. However, when he submitted Clay Guida and Jim Miller, both those were in round 1. He submitted David Tamor in 55 seconds in the first round, so that one would be also an under. And when he TKO'd Nick Lentz, that was at 2 minutes and 11 seconds, so just under that 1.5 mark. I think that's the way to go. So we have a very early lean to the under 1.5 in this fight, and we're going to have to wait and see where that line comes out, what it's lined at, but keep your eyes peeled for that one because that's probably going to be a play. And here we are at the co-main event where Paul, the Bear Jew Craig, takes on Mauricio Shogun Hua, and this is the one and only line for this fight that I tweeted out early. We're on Paul Craig, folks. Friends don't let friends pass on Paul Craig. This guy is a money-making machine, and this is exactly the kind of spot where you want to take him. You don't take Paul Craig as a favorite. You don't take Paul Craig as a pick'em unless he's fighting a bum like Vinicius Moreira. And you do take him when he's a plus 200, plus 250, plus 300 dog. That's where we want this guy. I hope you tailed that because we beat another line move. Money has come in on Paul Craig, and he's down to plus 110. You can get him at plus 225 right now in a couple of spots, plus 208. So, I mean, he is definitely the one taking the cash at this point, and I'm honestly surprised that he's still up in the 200 ballpark. I thought he would have been bet down by now. Mauricio Shogun Hua is an absolute legend in the sport, and this is his Brazilian homecoming. I expect this to be his retirement fight. He has yet to fight in 2019, and Paul Craig is not the kind of guy you want to set him up with. His last fight with Tyson Pedro was awful. So in early 2018, he got KO'd by Anthony Lionheart Smith in the first round. He comes back in December of 2018 and takes on Tyson Pedro. Pedro roughs him up in that fight. I mean, Shogun is known for being a brawler, bite down on your mouthpiece, and swing kind of guy, and that's exactly why we loved him. He got all the way to the title at 205 doing that. So now, he's knocking on the door of 40, and he hasn't changed his style. That's something that we absolutely have to take advantage of. Paul Craig is a finisher. That's all the dude does. He's got 12 wins, 11 of them are by submission. His one other win is by knockout. He's never been to the scorecards, ever, not even in a loss. Now, he has been knocked out 3 times. That was by Tyson Pedro, Khalil Roundtree, and then Alonzo Minifield. And Mauricio Shogun Hua, he's been knocked out 5 times over the course of his career. Granted, he's a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu guy, so we're not necessarily expecting Paul to get the submission unless he hurts him on the feet first. But the way Hua fought that fight against Pedro, I've got some serious questions. His durability is gone, man. He got rocked hard in round 1. One thing he's always been able to do is bite down on the mouthpiece and throw back while he's hurt to get his opponents off of him. So he does take it to the mat. He like panic wrestles when he's hurt sometimes, and if he can get on top of you, he's really heavy. But that plays right into Paul Craig's game. And Paul Craig, he's improving on the feet. He's got heavy hands. He can hurt people on the feet, but we saw sometimes, his last couple of fights, he got that big KO from Alonzo Minifield because he went to the well one too many times. I just have serious questions about Shogun Hua's durability at this point. This is essentially a fade on an old fighter. Shogun's probably only going to be in the octagon for 1, maybe 2 more fights at most, and this one right here might be it, because he waited until he got into Brazil for this one. So I want to go back to that fight. I didn't finish my thought on the Tyson Pedro situation. Pedro roughed Hua up. I'm really shocked that Pedro didn't finish him. But what ended up happening is somehow something happened to Tyson Pedro's knee or his ankle in that fight. And when he got off the stool in round 3, he comes out at the very beginning of round 3. And while he's kind of stepping to move towards Hua, his knee buckles. And then he just falls over. I mean, Mauricio Shogun Hua has a 3rd round KO victory on his record over Tyson Pedro. but that's only because Pedro literally laid down. I mean, something happened to blow his knee out, and he fell over. Hua jumped on him and started pounding on him. It was all Pedro before that, and I'm shocked he made it that far. He's an old man. He looks old. He fights old. The way he's fought his entire career is finally catching up with him. Paul Craig is exactly the kind of finisher that will take advantage of that, and we're getting exactly the kind of line that we want to bet on a fighter like Paul Craig. So don't get me wrong. Hua could land that one big bomb. When Paul Craig hurts him and rocks him, Hua could come over the top with a big shot and knock him out. That absolutely can happen here. But I'm more than willing to roll those dice because Hua is not a current fighter. Hua is not a young up-and-coming fighter. He does not have a great gas tank. He's slow. He doesn't move his head. And the game has far surpassed him. Paul Craig has far more weapons than Hua has. And at plus 230, I am all kinds of over this. You know, speaking of plays that I tweeted out, I just want to remind you all that I went 3-0 in NFL plays that I tweeted out on Sunday. So your boy giving out football picks on top of MMA picks. So those don't count towards the record. Don't worry. I'm not adding those to the record or anything like that. But just wanted y'all to know I do more than just MMA. I'm gonna go tout. I'm gonna start making you pay for my football picks. No, I'm kidding. Totally kidding. We are at the main event of the evening, and this is one I'm really excited for. We have got Jan Błachowicz, who I think is the sleeper at 205. People do not respect this man. Taking on, or I guess I should say welcoming, Jacare Souza to the light heavyweight division. Ronaldo Jacare Souza has been a 185er his entire career and is moving up to 205 for this spot, and this is a hell of a fight. Jacare is the kind of guy who just puts everything into every punch. He's dangerous everywhere. He kind of reminds me, we were talking about the grapplers earlier on the card who have a sick high-level submission ground game and then learned how to strike on top of it because fuck it, you don't want to go to the ground with me. That's exactly the kind of fighter that this guy is. He has no fear of the ground game from anybody because he's such a high-level Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu practitioner. Of his 26 wins, 14 of those came by submission. He's got a 54% submission rate. Dude is on another level. Now, lately, he's been alternating wins and losses. He challenged Robert the Reaper Whittaker in 2017, got knocked out. He turns around in 18, knocks out Derek Brunson. He loses that split decision 3-round battle to Kelvin Gastelum in 2018, which some people had questions about. Then he KOs Chinny Chris Weinman at the end of 2018. Good year for Jacare Souza. Now, just earlier this year, he gets ground out by Jack Hermanson over a full 5 and finally decides it's time for me to move up. I'm surprised he made it through that fight, actually, because Jack hurt him, and he hurt him a lot. They went to war in that fight. And he's coming up and taking on Jan Błachowicz, who I guess Jan's just going to be the guy that welcomes 185ers to the new division because he fought Thiago Santos and Luke Rockhold so far. He's gone 1-1 in those fights. He looked very good against Thiago Santos, and we've talked about Thiago Santos being a measuring stick of sorts for us because how damn good the guy is at both 185 and 205. And then we cashed one of the best plays of all of 2019 when Luke Rockhold came up, and he knocked him out stiff. I love Jan Błachowicz, and I think he's got an outside shot at John Jones. I know y'all are going to laugh at me when I say that, but I'm dead serious. So Jacare Souza is 6'1". He's got a 72-inch reach. He averages 2.71 significant strikes per minute, and he absorbs 2.81 strikes per minute. So he fights very, very close with his opponents. He does have that take one to give one style on the feet, and then he spends a lot of time in the clinch and a lot of time on the ground because that's really his best strength, his best wheelhouse. So he does have a slower pace, and he manages his gas tank pretty well. Now, like we just saw, he can go longer, though, so it's not like he has gas tank real problems because he can go a full 5 rounds, and he wears his opponents out and takes it out of them over the course of that time, so they slow down about as much as he does. Jan, on the flip side of this thing, is 6'2". He has got a 78-inch reach, so he's 1 inch taller, and he's going to have a significant 6-inch reach advantage. He averages 3.54 significant strikes per minute and absorbs 3.11. He also is a fighter who fights very closely with his opponents, but the big difference here is Jan's boxing. His hand speed Something I talked about a lot when we broke down the Luke Rockhold fight. His hand speed is something else. I'm a huge fan of Jan Błachowicz and his skill set. He's from Poland. He's tough as nails. He's got a very good wrestling base. He's got good hips. He's really strong. He can keep the fight standing or where he wants it to be. And if he needs to take it to the ground, he is also very capable of doing that. He averages 1.39 takedowns per 15-minute fight with a 52% takedown accuracy. That's impressive. Jacare on the flip side of this thing is a bit more of one of those chain grapplers we talked about a bit earlier. He averages 2.7 takedowns per 15 minutes, so more takedowns landed, but at a 40% rate. So he's missing more of his takedown attempts, but he hits more overall because he does it a lot. So this is a fight that, the way I see this playing out, I think Jacare is going to wade forward like he always does. He's going to try and land some bombs, close the distance, try and get the takedown. Jan is going to counter wrestle and try and keep this thing standing, and then he's going to, in turn, attempt to light Souza up on the feet with his fast hands. Now, if these guys get into a trade, don't get me wrong, Jacare can clip Jan, but Jan's got a pretty damn good chin. He has only been KO'd twice over the course of his career, one by Thiago Santos, who we have absolutely established as a complete motherfucker and can KO basically anybody. And then his other KO loss was all the way back in 2011. I don't even know anything about that. And it says KO retirement, so he didn't retire after that, but I'm not sure exactly what happened there. I need to go back and look at that. At any rate, his chin checks out. There's only been one guy in the last 8 years who's been able to damage his chin, and it's a guy who damages everybody's chin. So, long story short, I lean Jan here. I've got a very serious lean to Jan. I know a lot of people are taking that dog shot on Souza because it's not very often that you get Jacare Souza around the plus 200 dog range. He has been bet down, though, to about plus 170. So Jan Błachowicz is sitting around minus 200, minus 205. I'm considering a parlay using Jan Błachowicz. I don't know if I want to run that risk, though, because Souza is very, very dangerous. And I'm considering actually just laying the wood and playing Jan straight. But I think money is continuing to come in on Souza, and I think it will continue to do so because people like that dog shot there. He is a live dog, don't get me wrong. We could see a completely reinvented Souza at 205, but honestly, I think he's just going to be undersized. I think he's old. I think he's having problems. He struggled at 185, and now that he's moving up to 205, it's kind of a last-ditch effort, and I wouldn't be shocked if he went the way of Luke Rockhold. I would not be surprised if Jan Błachowicz got the KO here. So I want to kind of let this line mature. I want to see it evolve. I want to see where people go with it, and if I can get, I don't know, minus 170 or something like that on Jan Błachowicz, I'll probably just play him straight. So keep an eye out on that Twitter at DieHardMMAPod because there are several bets that I may end up pulling the trigger on later on in the week. That'll do her, diehards. Thank you so much for sticking with me all the way through that. I'm going to stop telling you all that this is going to be a short episode because apparently even when I say that, I still talk for an hour. I love MMA too much. Can't stop myself. Let's recap those picks. We're going to kick our night off by riding the hot hand with Veronica Macedo at minus 120. We are going to take Bobby King Green as a slight underdog plus 105 to get it done against the aging Brazilian. We're going to rock with James Krause. We're going to count on him putting Moraes in the ground 6 feet under in the distance at plus 225. We have a very heavy lean to Oliveira Gordon under minus 1.5 rounds. We're going to take Paul the Bear Jew Craig. We locked him up at plus 230 earlier in the week. And we have a heavy lean to Jan frickin' Błachowicz in the main event. Stay tuned to see if that turns into a full pick. I love y'all. Thank you for the support. Let's get this thing back on track and let's freaking roll.